Hi there. My name's Roy. I'm an expert on addiction, and I'd like to talk to you today about the greatest medical problem in North America addiction. We don't recognize addiction as a medical problem in society, but the medical associations of North America do recognize addiction as a medical problem. And therein lies the problem. We have the medical profession on the one hand, which says, okay, this is a medical condition. Unfortunately, we don't have a drug that can treat it. The only thing we do know, as it says in the DSM-4, is that spontaneous recovery has been made by individuals who change their lifestyle and their spiritual beliefs. In other words, a spiritual remedy exists for alcoholism. Now, why is that? Well, I think first of all, we have to look at why people become alcoholics. According to the ACE study, that's the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, carried out in 1992, or begun in 1992, and ongoing to this day, has shown that 85% of all alcoholics are people who were abused as children, and they call abuse an adverse childhood experience, hence the name of the study, ACE. Google it now and read it thoroughly, and you too will understand what the scientific and medical community involved in addiction and addiction cases has known for quite a long time, and that is that alcoholics are basically adult abused children who have never received counseling or therapy for the abuse they suffered as children. And therefore, they are, in the clinical definition, suffering from a post traumatic stress disorder, which has led them to alcohol as the only available medication for that terrible post traumatic stress. So let's look at what we mean by childhood adverse experiences. When I was 3.5 years old, I developed an inner ear infection and I was rushed off to the hospital. There I was left alone in the hospital for 8 days. Um, that created a fundamental belief that I would be abandoned at some point and that there was nothing I could do about it. As it turned out, while I was in the hospital, my parents brought me a great big ladder truck for the fire department, and I enjoyed playing with it. But when I left, I was told it had to stay at the hospital. So, insult to injury, that was the first that I remember. Now, the second was when I fractured my arm at grade school in a small town in Ontario. I was pushed off a seat above a concrete entranceway and landed and had a really bad fracture of my right arm. Um, and I was wheeled away from the school on a stretcher with the entire student body looking down on me. I remember that created nightmares. They don't come back anymore. I think they stopped when I was about 45. I'm not certain. That was number two. Three, I was 11 years old and I was playing out on a diving board. And I got pushed off the high board. And because there were swimmers directly below me, I grabbed at a flagpole, swung around, hit the railing, and fell face first onto the platform 3 meters below and fractured my skull in two places. I was near death. And again, I was placed in a situation where I was the center of focus. I was put in a lawn chair facing a dike at Crescent Beach. And the entire population of the beach had migrated up because of the commotion. The platform I was swimming on was floating out in the middle of a tiny little bay at the north end of Crescent Beach. Um, my parents separated. Well, I'll go back before that. My mother was abusive to me my entire life. And by the time I was a teenager, she had taken to physically abusing me with any handy instrument like a frying pan or a fishing rod or whatever she could find. Um, my parents separated. I had to leave a school that I was really enjoying for the first time in my life. And so there we go beyond the pale. Um, by that time, I had given up. I had a real sense for myself that I was of no value, that nobody liked me, that I was ugly, I was incompetent. And I lived with that as a foundational belief until I was until I was 54 years old. 18 years ago, I ended up in hospital with a blood poison from associating with alcoholics and drug addicts. And I almost died. And before I left the hospital, the doctor asked me what I was going to do, and I said I was going to go home, and he said he didn't think that was a good idea. He thought I should go into recovery, and if I knew anybody that could help, I should contact them. And so I did. Now, recovery is a terribly difficult place for a new alcoholic, drug addict like me, but it was easy as soon as I changed the way I thought about myself. If I could be happy in that home, I could be happy anywhere. And so I began a journey that's gone on now for 18 years. The problem with the current opioid crisis and why it's so difficult to deal with is because, unlike any other drug, cocaine, for example, you can give a cocaine addict a drug that will reduce by 20-fold his craving for cocaine. And after about 24 hours, the craving is purely psychological. Heroin, which is a physical craving, you feel sick until you do your heroin if you're a heroin addict, uh, that can be replaced by uh, other much less um, difficult to come by and less expensive alternatives like methadone, for example. But you can also go off cold turkey. It's not recommended because cold turkey from heroin, uh, with somebody with a weakened heart system, can die from the shock. Same with alcohol. Alcohol should not be stopped without going through detox. The problem uh, with people who've become addicted to fentanyl is that nothing but fentanyl will make them feel as though they're not going to die. So that puts us in a really tricky position. The fentanyl addict, all he wants to do is not feel sick. The idea, if he's going to get high, he's going to die, basically. And so they have to be very careful and titrate or measure the amount of fentanyl they take very carefully. And that's usually based on what the dealer says. So the dealer will come, guy will say, yeah, I got some fentanyl. How you want? How strong is it, buddy? I want to know how fucking strong it is. This stuff is, yeah, take it real easy. Do a quarter of a hit. And the guy takes the fentanyl, goes rushing home and or back to his shooting gallery, gets there, and he can't remember what the dealer said because all he's been thinking about is getting high. So he does half the hit. and dies, or goes into cardiac arrest, or rather pulmonary arrest, and he's resuscitated with Narcan, or he dies. And how do you get somebody off a drug that you have no substitute for except the same drug? Well, you give them legally administered, carefully controlled doses of that drug, just enough to keep them from dying. And right now, the Canadian government will not authorize any of the clinics to use fentanyl for people who are suffering from fentanyl abuse disorder. So there you have it in a nutshell. Until the government specifically says you can give a fentanyl addict fentanyl, then that will end the fentanyl crisis. It's not an opioid crisis. Opioid is the family of drugs. It is not the specific drug. All opioids are covered. It includes Tylenol 3, uh, heroin, morphine, uh, opium. Those are all, quote, opiates. They all come from the same fundamental chemical structure, the opium molecule, which comes from the red poppy, grown in Afghanistan by the millions and millions and millions. And that's a whole different subject. Thanks for listening.